Well, the Canaanites were back in control, and the Israelites again were living under oppression. Picture this scene. A man is approaching this grove of trees, and he's wondering, why am I being summoned here? This man who was the commander-in-chief of his army, but it was a ceremonial title. Everybody knew that King Jabin was the one that was really in control, and he had been in control for 20 years. The Canaanites had been in control. And so this man, Barak, he comes up because he has been summoned by a judge. Now, the Israelites didn't have kings. Jabin was their king. And so instead they had judges that would rule and govern their people. And he had been summoned in front of the judge. He didn't know what to do because it could only mean one thing. All he could think of was that the judge was going to ask him to go up against Sisera, this amazing general in charge of this iron army of chariots that nobody could stand against. There was no way anyone could possibly stand against them. They were invincible. And he couldn't think of any other reason why he was being summoned that day. Can you imagine how slow he walked to go up there? And as he approached there, the judge turned to him and said, "Barak, son of Abinoam, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded that you lead your divisions to Mount Tabor. There you will find Sisera and his armored brigade, and the Lord will give him into your hand, and thus Israel will be delivered from the oppression of Jabin." Oh, no. Barak raised his gaze to the ruler, to that judge, and his fear got the best of him, and he said, "I'll do as you say, but you need to go with me." And the judge, Deborah, said, "I'll go with you, and you will succeed. You've already lost honor by needing someone else to command you. And so Sisera will be taken, but he will be given by a woman." How had they gotten there? How had they ended up, after all of that, back under Canaanite rule? Barak closed his eyes and remembered what it was like. The Lord had commissioned someone to carry on after Moses. Who was that someone? Do you remember? Joshua. You remember the song? All right, there you go. Joshua, son of Nun, was going to be the one to replace Moses. He had been up on Mount Sinai with Moses when he got the 10 Commandments. Joshua had been one of the 12 who had gone in to spy out the Holy Land there 40 years earlier. His original name was Hoshea, okay? But Moses renamed him Joshua in English, in Hebrew, Yeshua. Have you ever heard that name before? Yeshua. It means the Lord is salvation. Hold on to that for about 3 or 4 weeks. It's going to be important, okay? After Moses' death, the Lord spoke to Joshua and said,
"Get going. Cross this Jordan River, you and all your people. Cross to the country I'm giving to the people of Israel. I'm giving you every square inch of the land you set your foot on, just as I promised Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon east to the great river, the Euphrates River, all the Hittite country, and then west to the great sea. It's all yours, all your life. No one will be able to hold out against you. In the same way I was with Moses, I will be with you. I won't give up on you. I won't leave you. Strength, courage. You are going to lead the people and inherit the land that I have promised to give to their ancestors. Give it everything you've got, heart and soul. Make sure you carry out the law that Moses commanded you, every bit of it. Don't get off track, either left or right, so as to make sure you get to where you're going, and don't for a minute let this book of the Revelation be out of your mind. Ponder and meditate on it day and night, making sure you practice everything written in it. Then when you get to where you are going, you will succeed. Haven't I commanded you? Strength, courage. Don't be timid. Don't be discouraged. God, your God, is with you every step you take."
Now, just as Moses had sent spies out 40 years ago, including Joshua, Joshua now sent 2 spies on ahead as well. And they would check out the very first city that they would encounter, which was Jericho. Jericho, yes. Now, when they reached the city, they entered the house of Rahab, a prostitute. Okay, I'm going to pause here in the story to say, no, I don't know why the first place they went was to the house of a prostitute, but I intend to ask as soon as I get to heaven. I'm just saying. Okay, back to the story. I digress. Someone found out and demanded that Rahab turn these spies over to the king, but she covered for him, saying that the spies had already left. She then went up on the roof where she had hidden them and said,
I know that God has given you the land. We're all afraid. Everyone in the country feels hopeless. We heard how God dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you left Egypt, and what he did to the 2 Amorite kings east of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you put under a holy curse and destroyed. And we heard about it and our hearts sank. We had all the wind knocked out of us, and all because of you and your God, who is God of the heavens above and the God of the earth below.
And because she had shown them mercy, they promised that when God gave the city to them, they would spare her and her family. And they kept that promise. She lowered them down out of a window on the rope because she lived right at the edge of the city on the city wall, and they were able to escape. Wow, what an amazing story. But did you hear the ironic part? Did you catch what she said? The Canaanites, why didn't they go to the promised land when God told them? This is not a rhetorical question. They were scared. And what did Rahab say that the Canaanites thought about the Israelites? They were terrified of them. They'd heard stories that their God had parted the Red Sea for them. Had they gone immediately, they would have conquered them, no problem. Go figure. Now, we would never doubt, this is just a story, because we would never doubt and hesitate to do what God called us to do or where to go, right? Yeah, so we just have to stretch a little on that. Okay, I digress again. So Joshua gathered up the people, and they headed for the promised land. And just as he had done at the Red Sea, we forget about this, when they got to the river Jordan, and they brought the Ark of the Covenant there, God again parted the waters of the river Jordan, and they went through on dry land. Now, when the king heard that the Lord God had parted the Red Sea for their parents and now parted the river Jordan for them, they were scared spitless. When the Israelites got to the city of Jericho, it was locked up tight. No one could go in or out. They were ready for an attack.
God spoke to Joshua, look sharp now. I've already given Jericho to you, along with its king and its crack troops. Here's what you are to do. March around the city, all your soldiers. Circle the city once. Repeat this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horn trumpets in front of the chest. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, the priests blowing away on their trumpets. And then a long blast to the ram's horn. When you hear that, all the people are to shout at the top of their lungs, and the city wall will collapse at once. All the people are to enter, every man straight on in.
So Joshua called the priests and told them, take up the Ark of the Covenant. And then he had 7 others carry 7 shofars, the ram's horn trumpets, to sound loudly and lead the way. And then he told the people, set out. I want you to march around this city behind the ark. And they did. Joshua spoke, and the people moved.
Joshua had given orders to the people. Don't shout. In fact, don't even speak. Not so much as a whisper until you hear me say, shout, then shout away.
Can you imagine that? 6 days going around the city, following all these people, following the Ark of the Covenant, not a single word, only the sound of the shofar, the ram's horn, as it led the Ark of the Covenant. And then on the 7th day, the signal went up. Shout, God has given you the city. And when they did, the walls simply crumbled away, and they rushed in and took the city. Wow. You know, you'd think that would be enough to make you believe for always and for your children to always follow. So did they? Nah. No. The time passed, and they began to enjoy the comforts of this land that they'd acquire. And instead of getting rid of the Canaanites and some of their very difficult and challenging ways, some of the worship of Baal and things like that. Remember the child sacrifice they were worried about originally? Yeah. Well, instead of doing all that, they forgot the Lord. And they started intermarrying with them, and they started worshiping the gods of the Canaanites. They started living just like them. Their children who hadn't seen what God had done, didn't know the Lord because their parents hadn't taught them, hadn't spread the story to them. And they started doing evil in the sight of the Lord and break covenant with God. And God was angry with them. And their enemies did defeat them over and over. But the Lord would then have mercy and raise up people to lead them, judges, not a king, but judges, to deliver them from their oppressors. The problem was they'd forgotten God's great acts on their behalf. They stopped telling the story. And when you stop telling the story, people stop hearing the story. Oh, you might know the story, but when you forget to tell it, you forget to tell it to yourself and be reminded and be strengthened too. And the people that need to hear it never get to. They forgot their identity. They forgot who they were. They began to abandon God, and they did it over and over. A nation would come to oppress them, and they would cry out to God for deliverance, and God would send up another judge, and they would be defeated, and then the people would do the same thing over and over again. Who were these judges? Some of the names might be familiar to you. There was Samson, the one of great strength, who was defeated by a woman, remember? We have Samuel, the last judge. We have Gideon, who was such a brave and strong leader that they found him hiding in a wine press when he was called. And Deborah, a woman? I thought these were all patriarchs. We forget these stories. We get caught up in the story of Joshua and conquest, and we forget that God called everyone, the young and the old, men and women. I think to me the most intriguing of the judges was Deborah, and not just because she was a woman, but because she's the only judge in our story who was actually holding office when God raised her up to deliver God's people. She was a judge in Israel, and so that meant she arbitrated disputes and she decided legal cases, and she did so based on the guidance of God, and people saw her as a prophet of God. And she was the one that was standing in front of that man at the beginning of our story, Barak, as he came there to see what were his marching orders. Barak did lead his divisions into battle against Sisera, and he was victorious. Although Sisera escaped, he escaped to the tent, and he hid there in the tent of his chief metal worker, Heber the Kenite. And then while he slept at night, Heber the Kenite's wife, Yael, did him in and fulfilled the prophecy of Deborah that a woman had saved Israel there. God keeps his covenant in ways we do not expect. We expect the mighty commanders to be the one to do it, not people like us. We don't expect God to come and find us when we're hiding out in wine presses like Gideon. We are like Gideon. We lay out the fleece and say, Lord, if you could show me, because if tell me if there's dew on it in the morning, that means you want me to do this, and if there's not dew, then I'll do that. Dew on it. Okay, let's do a do-over. Okay, and this time, if you really want me to do that, there's no dew on it, and there's no dew on it. Are you sure? Can we go for round 3? Those are who God called. These are the patriarchs and the matriarchs of the story. They're people like us, people who said ultimately, God, I'm going to go and do what you asked me to do. But they needed more. They did need a king. And so next week, we're going to hear the story of the first kings of the children of Israel, and a time when the people lived in God's peace, God's shalom. But until we hear that part of the story, I leave you with the words of Joshua that I would ask you to become your words. For God is calling you to choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.